I want to go back just for a moment. My thinking is, and I don't remember for sure, but I think when we started Job, I may have indicated or thought that Job was probably the author of it. He may have been, we don't know. But he couldn't have written all of it because chapter 42 has a record of his death. So I don't think he wrote his death notice. But regardless of who wrote it, a bigger question that's come up in many people's minds is it an allegory or a parable or is it history? And I fall down with those who say that the way it's introduced and the fact that there are references to Job in Ezekiel and in the book of James, and all of those are scenarios where Job is listed as a specific person of history. We're given the country he came from. We're given a lot of details about his family. It's not the kind of stuff that you would have if it was an allegory. So it seems to me that he is presented as a real historical person. In Ezekiel 14, he is mentioned alongside Noah and Daniel, other historical people. And as we've made mention several times in James 5:11, he's mentioned as an example of spiritual endurance and listed along with Abraham, Rahab, and Elijah. So as we start chapter 41, I think we are indeed dealing with someone who actually walked on the face of the earth, and we can learn a lot. I trust we have been learning a lot from the book of Job. Now, last chapter and this chapter, we're dealing with some strange animals, or maybe something beyond that. So let's start verse 1 through 7. Can you draw out Leviathan with a hook, or snare his tongue with a line which you lure? Can you put a reed through his nose, or pierce his jaw with a hook? Will he make many supplications to you? Will he speak softly to you? Will he make a covenant with you? Will you take him as a servant forever? Will you play with him as with a bird? Or will you leash him for your maidens? Will your companions make a banquet for him? Will they apportion him among the merchants? Can you fill his skin with harpoons, or his head with fishing spears? Interesting words there. Well, in the previous chapter, Behemoth is spoken of, and here another, quote, monster, Leviathan, and was first mentioned, the Leviathan was first mentioned in chapter 3, verse 8, in the context of sailors and fishermen cursing Leviathan. So, outside of Scripture and in other places, and some people would say in Scripture as well, Leviathan is considered like a mythical sea monster or dragon. And yet in chapter 41, it does not seem to be mythical at all. The word means twisted one. And it's used in other locations like this. For example, Psalm 74, 12 through 14 refers to Leviathan as a sea serpent, and that God broke the head of the Leviathan long ago. And so in Psalm 104, 26, refers to Leviathan as a sea creature. Isaiah 27, 1 speaks of a future defeat of Leviathan. And earlier in Job 26, refers to God's piercing defeat of a fleeing serpent associated with the sea. So here in verse 2 of 41, can you put a reed through his nose or pierce his jaw with a hook? So on the one level here, God is describing an animal and or a being that Job is powerless to win against. So many, and I believe correctly, see regardless of whether or not there is a physical beast that is being referred to here, it's easy to have an association with what he's really talking about is Satan. And Satan, of course, is represented very often as a dragon or as a serpent in Genesis 3, Revelation 12, 13. So Leviathan may be another serpent-like manifestation of Satan. Regardless, the picture here is that Job was powerless against this mammoth creature, or certainly powerless against all that Satan would unleash against him or against us, and only God can defeat Leviathan. So, be that as it may, the question left with Job was, can you? Can you control this one? Can you overcome him? Do you have the power to deal with him? So Job is being confronted with his powerlessness, and ultimately with his powerlessness to control or to manipulate God in the way he would like to. But so far as just getting this far in doing some work on this week, that immediately came to my mind was the model prayer. And we are exhorted there how to pray. And it starts with honoring God and so many things, and then verse 13 of chapter 6, lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil, some would say from the evil one. And if we had any idea of how strong and mighty, he's not all powerful, but if we had a good comprehension of how strong and mighty and deceptive Satan is, I think we'd live a little bit more alert. We are exhorted that he goes about as a roaring lion seeking whom he may devour. We're exhorted to put on the whole armor of God. And I think we are strongly encouraged by the model of Jesus. He simply pull up the shield of faith. So I need to give proper respect to this ungodly one. And there are a lot of people in Christendom who flippantly go about commanding Satan this, and all this kind of stuff. And so when Jesus confronts him, or he's confronted by him, he puts up the shield of faith, and it's a done deal. And so we can take courage in that. Continuing sort of along the same line in verse 8 through 11, lay your hand upon him. Remember the battle. Never do it again. Indeed, any hope of overcoming him is false. Shall one not be overwhelmed at the sight of him? No one is so fierce that he would dare stir him up. Who is able to stand against me? Who has preceded me, and I should not? Who has preceded me that I should pay him? He's going from dealing with the satanic forces to the reality of who God is. Everything under heaven is mine. And so, in our own strength to defeat Satan is just not possible. this should cause us to flee to the shepherd. But in the stronger message, verse 10, the latter part, who then is able to stand against me? If Job cannot contend with Leviathan or with Satan, how in the world can he contend with God? And he had earlier didn't necessarily say he wanted to contend with God, but earlier he had said he wanted God to show up and so he could talk to him and help him to understand some things down here on earth. If Job could not contend with Leviathan or with Satan, whom Leviathan represents, how could Job ever hope to stand against God who made and who rules Leviathan? So in all of this, God is helping Job, and God is helping us to see our proper place before God. We certainly live in a time where even in Christianity there is not a sense of awe at the presence of God. And of all of the many questions that God is asking Job, what should come out of that, and did come out of it for Job, and what should come out of it for us, is that we should have an incredible awe before God. And he says in verse 11, the latter part, everything under heaven is mine. So God has dominion. If he's talking about some animal of the sea, but most likely talking about all the forces of evil headed by Satan himself, God rules. God's in charge. And the whole book of Job is a great proof that Satan is wrong. And that's one of the great messages here that's lived out in the book of Job. And as we know, God has not made Job privy of all that's going on. He likely has not made us totally aware of what he's accomplishing. He's wanting us to live by faith, to trust him, to worship him, to serve him, to go forward the way Job started. The Lord gave, the Lord took away, blessed be the name of the Lord, not accusing God falsely. And again, life in a fallen world, life tumbles in, and it's hard, and sometimes harder than others. And everywhere you turn, you find someone who's battling with cancer, or battling with this, or going along strong of body, and they have a major stroke, or a major catastrophe, or a crash, and people are gone. So many things. And where are you, God? This is a heart cry of millions. And when life tumbles in for us, it's going to be the tempted heart cry of our own hearts. Don't kid yourself. I don't care how spiritual you are. Don't kid yourself. When life tumbles in this sort of magnitude, it's going to be a test. Now, why would I say that? Because God said, in that day and time, there was nobody, we'll put it this way, was as spiritual and godly as Job. When you say, well, hey, it was a piece of cake, he immediately said, God gave, God took away, blessed be the name of the Lord. He didn't, oh yes, but then there'll come all these other chapters. And it was hard. And Job did not ever falsely accuse God. But boy, it was a fight. And I don't know, well, again, so far as we know, even at this point, we're not told that God has informed Job as to what was going on here. In fact, even in chapter 42, he does not lay out. By the way, Job, you remember, or you might not have known, this took place one day, And here's the discussion, and here's what I gave permission for Satan to do. Did Job ever know that? I don't know. So, Job cannot stand against him, and he cannot stand against God. That's the other thing that is being taught here in this whole section. Job 41, verse 18 through 21. Verse 18 starts, most of the translations are sneezing. One translation has snorting. And there are many animals. Have you ever seen a bull who's angry? And they're not sneezing, they're snorting. But it would have sort of the same effect. His eyes are like the eyelids of the morning. Out of his mouth goes burning light. Sparks of fire shoot out. Smoke goes out of his nostrils, and from a boiling pot and burning rushes. His breath kindles coals. A flame goes out of his mouth. Now again, let's assume that there is an animal, but most likely he's not doing literally that. These are picturesque words to describe the literal truth that Job, you're dealing with, and we're dealing with, opposition that is strong and mighty. And goes on in verse 22 through 34, talking about having a heart of stone. The mighty are afraid. Swords can't avail. Spears, darts, javelins, he regards as straw. Bronze as iron, as rotten wood. The arrow cannot make him flee. Darts are regarded as straw. He laughs at the threat of javelins. He spreads pointed marks in the mire. He makes the deep boil like a pot. He makes the sea like a pot of ointment. O earth, there is nothing like him which is made without fear. He beholds everything high. He is king over all the children of pride. So again, you see he's strong evidence here. He's not just talking about this animal. He's talking about the one who is the worst vicious animal of all, Satan himself. And his first sin was what? Pride. And the greatest sin in our lives is pride. And the chief thing that Satan would try to activate in our lives is a spirit of pride. So, again, that could have been an animal that would have come to Job's mind, but beyond that is Satan. He's strong, he's cruel, he's unsympathetic, he has a hard heart, causes the mighty to fear, cannot be successfully attacked, has few vulnerable spots, has no worthy adversaries, and is filled with pride. So, one commentator said, while it is true that Satan is never mentioned outside the prologue, the first couple of chapters, this does not mean that the Lord never deals with him. He deals with him here in the form of Leviathan, describing him to Job with the same sort of symbolic picture language that he uses in the Revelation. He is king over all of the children of pride. And again, God is showing Job and showing us two things here. Not only our natural powerlessness against spiritual enemies, but also that God is in charge. He's the creator. He rules everything, and he is the one before whom we bow. Now, put it forth into New Testament scenario, even though Jesus is not mentioned in Job's situation here, because when we start at the early that Job sacrifices, I believe we have every right to believe that God, the truth of God being related to only by a sinless sacrifice, Job knew that. He was looking forward in faith, even though the name Jesus had not been set forth. He knew that God would provide something beyond the four-footed animals. So again, wherever you have pictures, whether it's a sheep or a whatever, we're not talking about the sheep. All those sacrifices are not talking about sheep. We're talking about Jesus. But we have to talk about the sheep in the context of the Old Covenant and showing how that it's looking forward to Jesus.
I think God uses a lot of physical things, no matter what they are, even this Leviathan. It isn't important what that is. He's speaking spiritually and using physical things so that we can understand what he's saying spiritually to us.
Well, we've already seen in the earlier chapters, once God started speaking, he went through all these things of creation and of what God has done. Where were you when I did this? And where were you when I did this? And so God is coming to Job. And he said, well, Job lived a long time ago. He needed that. We don't need that. No, we do need that. We need to be in awe of God. All of this shows us the mightiness of God, and our place is a place of humility.
Well, God is mighty. Now, Satan is strong. He's showing Satan's strength, but God is mighty.
That's right. That's right.
He's above that. Yep.
So again, we're looking at these humanly unconquerable beasts. And they are examples to us of Satan's power. Job couldn't win over them by himself. And here's another thing that's coming out of all of this. Job had felt during all this journey that he was alone, that God wasn't there. And God has shown him in these brief chapters toward the end the fact that God is there. And that Job was not alone, and if Job had been left alone with Leviathan and Behemoth, he would have been smashed. He wasn't left alone. God was in charge. He is greater than the evil. And again, we may not understand the evil that has come upon us. But so we start where, and we must cling to what Job started with, worshiping God. There's a lot about our contests and our situation we may never know. And so we can try, well, if God would just tell me, no, his ways are above our ways. If he told us, we wouldn't understand. Our place is to worship him. Again, there's more in this book than we realize, and it's more needed than we realize because it's right where we live. Not hundreds of times, but thousands of years ago, here's a godly man, not a pagan, but a true worshiper of God, and again, who was not just limited to a page of understanding, but he understood the gospel. And so he worshiped. He gave sacrifices. And pointing out from the verses earlier there that right in the middle of all this, I know that my Redeemer liveth. He never pretended to be sinless. But by the grace of God, and we've emphasized this along the way, one of the things that kept him was he had a clear conscience. And that's very helpful in spiritual warfare. But his God was too small, in that there was so much about God that he had let the circumstances crowd out things I believe he already knew. And so God gave him revelation to expand his understanding. I am in control. I'm here. Where were you when I did this? And I'm in charge. Satan is not. So, what a Savior.